What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors finally reaches his breaking point with a talk show host who just won't quit pushing boundaries? Well, you're about to find out, because what went down between Harrison Ford and Jimmy Kimmel during what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about late-night television. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling me which celebrity you think would handle this situation better than Ford did. The tension was palpable from the moment Harrison Ford walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel live set. Ford, there to promote his latest project, carried himself with that familiar stoic demeanor that has defined his decades-long career. But something felt different tonight. Maybe it was the way his jaw was set just a little tighter than usual, or how his trademark half-smile seemed forced as he shook Kimmel's hand and settled into the guest chair. Kimmel, ever the showman, launched into his opening with his characteristic smirk. "Harrison Ford, everybody! The man, the myth, the legend who somehow made a career out of looking annoyed in every single movie." The audience laughed, but Ford's expression didn't change. He simply nodded once and said, "Jimmy." "Now, Harrison, I have to ask," Kimmel continued, leaning forward with that gleam in his eye that regular viewers know means trouble. "Is it true that you've been trying to kill off Han Solo since The Empire Strikes Back? Because honestly, it seems like you've been phoning it in since 1980. Ford shifted in his chair, his fingers drumming once against his knee. "Well, Jimmy, I think any actor wants to see their character have a meaningful arc. Han Solo's story needed to evolve." "Evolve," Kimmel repeated, drawing out the word mockingly. "Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looked more like you just wanted out of your contract so badly that you'd let them throw you into a pit." The audience laughed again, but this time there were a few uncomfortable murmurs mixed in. Ford's eyes narrowed slightly. "I think the fans understood the choice. It served the story." "Oh, the fans understood," Kimmel said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Right. Just like they understood when you came back for the sequel trilogy, looking like you'd rather be getting a root canal. Tell me, Harrison, did Disney have to threaten your family to get you back in that cockpit?" Ford's composure cracked just slightly. "That's not how it works, Jimmy." "No? Then how does it work? Because honestly, watching you in The Force Awakens was like watching someone hold a gun to a beloved family pet. The pain was palpable." The atmosphere in the studio shifted. What had started as typical talk show ribbing was beginning to feel mean-spirited. Ford straightened in his chair, his voice taking on an edge. "I've always taken my work seriously. Every role, every film." "Seriously?" Kimmel laughed, but it wasn't a warm sound. "Come on, Harrison. We've all seen the interviews. You look like you're being tortured every time someone asks you about Star Wars. It's become a meme at this point. There are compilation videos of you looking miserable in interviews that have millions of views." "Maybe," Ford said carefully. "I just don't enjoy having my professional choices dissected by people who've never been in my position." Kimmel's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "Ooh, shots fired. People who've never been in your position. You mean us regular folks who don't get paid millions to pretend to care about fictional characters?" The audience was quieter now, sensing the shift in energy. Ford's hands gripped the arms of his chair. "I mean people who don't understand what it's like to have every facial expression analyzed and turned into content for strangers on the internet." "Content for strangers," Kimmel repeated. "You mean like this show? The show you agreed to come on?" "Nobody forced you to be here, Harrison. You could have stayed home and counted your money." Ford's voice was steady, but there was steel underneath. "I came here to talk about my work, not to be insulted." "Insulted?" Kimmel feigned shock. "I'm just asking the questions everyone wants to know. Like, for instance, is it true that you improvised the 'I love you too' scene in The Empire Strikes Back because you couldn't be bothered to learn the actual line?" "That's not what happened." "No? Because I heard you just said 'whatever came to.'" Mind because you were already mentally checked out of the whole thing. Kind of like how you look right now, actually. The studio had gone almost completely silent. Even the band members were exchanging glances. Ford's jaw was visibly tight now. The line felt right for the character in that moment. It was a creative choice made in collaboration with the director. A creative choice, Kimmel nodded sagely. Or you just didn't care enough to stick to the script. Which, let's be honest, seems to be your brand at this point. The guy who's too cool to care. Ford's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Kimmel leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. Because from where I'm sitting, you've made a career out of playing the same grumpy character in different costumes. Han Solo, grumpy. Indiana Jones, grumpy. Rick Deckard, grumpy. It's like you found one note and decided to ride it for 40 years. The audience was dead silent now. Ford's hands were trembling slightly with barely contained anger. Those characters are nothing alike. Aren't they, though? They're all just variations of Harrison Ford being irritated that he has to be there. Which again brings us back to tonight. You clearly don't want to be here, so why are we pretending? Otherwise? Ford stood up abruptly, the sudden movement causing his microphone to feedback briefly. You know what, Jimmy? You're right. I don't want to be here. The silence in the studio was deafening. Ford remained standing, his hands clenched at his sides, staring down at Kimmel, who was still lounging in his chair with that insufferable smirk plastered across his face. Oh, now we're getting somewhere, Kimmel said, clapping his hands together slowly. The real Harrison Ford is finally showing up. This is the most emotion I've seen from you since you found out they were killing off Han Solo. Ford's voice was low and dangerous. You think this is funny? I think it's television, Kimmel replied, gesturing to the cameras that were still rolling. I think it's honest. For once, you're not hiding behind that whole strong, silent type act. You're actually showing the audience who you really are. And who am I, Jimmy? Ford asked, taking a step closer to the desk. Since you seem to have me all figured out. Kimmel's grin widened. You're a guy who got lucky. Right place, right time. George Lucas needed a carpenter who could read lines. And boom, instant movie star. But deep down, you know you're not really an actor. You're just a guy who happened to be standing there when lightning struck. The audience gasped audibly at this. Even for Kimmel, this was crossing a line that most talk show hosts wouldn't dare approach. Ford's face had gone completely stone cold. A carpenter who could read lines, Ford repeated slowly. Come on, Harrison. We all know the story. You were building cabinets for Lucas when he cast you in American Graffiti. It's not like you went to Juilliard. You didn't train at the actor's studio. You were literally hammering nails when you got discovered. Ford's voice was barely controlled. And that bothers you? It doesn't bother me, Kimmel shrugged. But it explains a lot. It explains why you always look like you'd rather be anywhere else. Because maybe, deep down, you know you don't really belong up there with the real actors. The studio was so quiet you could hear the cameras humming. Ford stood perfectly still for a long moment, then slowly sat back down. But instead of backing down, his posture suggested a man who had just decided to engage fully in a fight he hadn't wanted. You want to talk about belonging, Jimmy? Ford's voice was calm now, which somehow made it more menacing. Let's talk about what you do for a living. Kimmel's smile faltered slightly. What I do for a living is entertain people. Is that what this is? Entertainment? Ford gestured around the studio. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a middle-aged man trying desperately to stay relevant by tearing down people who've actually accomplished something. The audience stirred uncomfortably. This was uncharted territory for a late-night talk show. I've accomplished plenty, Kimmel shot back, but his voice had lost some of its cockiness. Have you? Ford leaned forward now, fixing Kimmel with a stare that had intimidated directors for decades. Let's see. You hosted a game show where people answered questions about their own genitals. Then you got this gig, where you spend your time making fun of celebrities who are contractually obligated to sit here and take it. That's your legacy, Jimmy. Professional humiliation. Kimmel's face was reddening. At least I don't sleepwalk through million-dollar movies. Sleepwalk? Ford nodded thoughtfully. You know what sleepwalking looks like, Jimmy? It looks like doing the same monologue format that Carson perfected 50 years ago and pretending it's fresh. It looks like reading jokes off cue cards that a room full of writers had to create for you because you can't come up with anything original yourself. Those writers are very talented, Kimmel said defensively. I'm sure they are. But they're not you, are they? When people laugh at your show, they're not really laughing at you. They're laughing at words other people put in your mouth. At least, when I'm on screen, it's my choices, my interpretation, my work. Kimmel was visibly agitated now, his usual composure cracking. My work is connecting with the audience. My work is making people feel comfortable enough to open up. Ford let out a short, humorless laugh. Making people feel comfortable? Is that what you call this? Because I have to tell you, Jimmy, this is the most uncomfortable I've felt in an interview in 30 years. And I've been interviewed by some real pieces of work. Maybe that's because you're finally being honest for once instead of giving those robotic answers you're famous for. Robotic answers, Ford repeated. You mean professional answers. Answers that don't throw my colleagues under the bus or reveal private conversations I've had with directors. Answers that show respect for the process and the people I work with, or answers that reveal absolutely nothing about who you are as a person. Ford's eyes flashed. You want to know who I am as a person? I'm someone who shows up prepared. I'm someone who respects the craft and the people I work with. I'm someone who doesn't need to tear others down to make myself feel important. And I'm someone who asks the questions that fans actually want answered, instead of just lobbing softballs about how wonderful everyone is. No, Jimmy. You're someone who mistakes cruelty for honesty. You're someone who thinks being mean makes you edgy. You're someone who's built a career on making people squirm and calling it comedy. Kimmel stood up abruptly, his face flushed. You know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe I do ask tough questions. But at least I'm not a bitter old man who's been coasting on 3 good movies for 40 years, the audience gasped again. Ford stood as well, and for a moment it looked like the two men might actually come to blows. 40 years, Ford said, quietly. 40 years of working with some of the most talented people in the industry. 40 years of bringing characters to life that people actually care about. What have you given people, Jimmy? What will people remember about your contribution to entertainment? They'll remember that I wasn't afraid to ask the real questions. They'll remember that you were cruel to people who couldn't fight back because they needed to promote their movies. They'll remember that you confused meanness with wit. And when you're gone, they'll replace you with someone younger who can do the exact same job because there's nothing unique about what you do. Kimmel's hands were shaking now with rage. Get out! Ford raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? I said get out. This interview is over. Security. The word security hung in the air like a challenge. Ford didn't move. He stood there, completely calm, while Kimmel's chest heaved with barely controlled fury. The audience was frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing entertainment or a genuine breakdown of professional decorum. Security? Ford's voice carried a note of genuine disbelief. You're calling security on me for telling you the truth? 2 large men in dark suits appeared from the wings, moving slowly toward the interview area. They looked uncertain, clearly uncomfortable with the situation they'd been thrust into. This wasn't exactly standard protocol for removing an unruly guest. Kimmel pointed at Ford with a trembling finger. Remove him from my studio, now. Ford looked at the security guards, then back at Kimmel, and something shifted in his expression. The anger was still there, but it was joined by something else? Pity, maybe, or disappointment. Your studio, Ford said quietly. That's interesting, Jimmy, because last I checked, this studio belongs to ABC. You're just an employee here, same as everyone else, but you've gotten so comfortable playing the king of late night that you forgot you're just another guy with a job. I don't have to listen to this, Kimmel snapped, but his voice cracked slightly. No, you don't, Ford agreed. That's the beautiful thing about being you, isn't it? When things get uncomfortable, when someone calls you out on your behavior, you can just make them disappear. You can cut to commercial, edit it out, pretend it never happened. The security guards had stopped a few feet away, clearly reluctant to actually lay hands on Harrison Ford. One of them spoke up nervously. Mr. Ford, we're going to need you to come with us. Ford looked at the man with genuine kindness. I understand. You're just doing your job, but I'm not causing any trouble here. I'm just having a conversation with Jimmy about respect and professionalism. A conversation? Kimmel's voice was shrill now. You're attacking me on my own show. I'm responding. To your attacks, Jimmy, there's a difference. You spent the last 20 minutes trying to humiliate me on national television. And when I defended myself, you couldn't handle it. Ford turned to address the audience directly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded movie screens for decades. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to think about what you've witnessed here tonight. You've seen a talk show host who invited me here as a guest, then spent the entire time trying to tear me down for your entertainment. And when I refused to just sit there and take it, when I stood up for myself with the same energy he brought to attacking me, he called security. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. This is what passes for entertainment. Now, Ford continued, this is what we've decided is acceptable. We invite people into our homes through our televisions, and we let hosts like Jimmy here treat them like punching bags, all in the name of getting a reaction, getting a viral moment, getting clicks and views. Kimmel was red-faced and sputtering. You don't know what you're talking about. This is comedy. This is how the show works. Ford turned back to him, his expression sad rather than angry now. Is it funny, Jimmy? Look around. Is anyone laughing? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a room full of people who are deeply uncomfortable, watching one man's desperate attempt to stay relevant by destroying someone else's dignity. I don't have to explain myself to you, Kimmel shot back, but his voice lacked conviction now. No, you don't, Ford agreed. But maybe you should explain it to yourself. Maybe when you go home tonight, you should ask yourself if this is really who you want to be, if this is really the legacy you want to leave behind. Ford reached down and unclipped his microphone, setting it gently on the chair he'd been sitting in. The small gesture somehow carried more weight than all the shouting that had come before. I've been in this business for a long time, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the studio without the microphone. I've worked with some incredible people, and I've worked with some real jerks, but I've never encountered someone who seemed to take such genuine pleasure in trying to make another person feel small. The security guards looked at each other uncertainly. Ford hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made any threatening moves, hadn't done anything that would typically warrant removal from a television studio. You know what the saddest part is, Jimmy? Ford continued. You're actually pretty good at this job when you want to be. I've seen clips of you being genuinely funny, genuinely warm with guests. You have talent, but somewhere along the way, you decided that being cruel was easier than being creative. Kimmel's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Ford nodded to the security guards. Gentlemen, you don't need to escort me anywhere. I'm leaving on my own. He looked directly into the main camera. To anyone watching at home, I want you to remember something. You don't have to accept being treated poorly just because someone has a platform. You don't have to laugh at cruelty just because it's on television. You deserve better than this. And frankly, so do I. He turned and walked toward the exit, his steps measured and dignified. Just before he reached the edge of the set, he stopped and looked back at Kimmel one last time. Jimmy, I genuinely hope you figure out what's making You so angry at the world? Because taking it out on your guests isn't helping anyone, least of all you." And with that, Harrison Ford walked off the set, leaving behind a studio full of stunned silence and a talk show host who looked like he'd just been hit by a truck. The cameras kept rolling as Kimmel stood there, his mouth agape, clearly having no idea how to recover from what had just happened. The audience remained silent, still processing what they'd witnessed. It was the kind of moment that would be talked about for years, dissected and analyzed and debated across social media and entertainment news. But in that moment, in that studio, there was just silence and the echo of one man's dignity in the face of another man's cruelty. So what do you think? Could Harrison Ford have handled this situation any better? Or was Jimmy Kimmel completely out of line from the start? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the moments when Hollywood's biggest stars finally reached their breaking point.